Hey there, I'm Peter Saxe, and welcome back to The Joy of Jazz. What I like to talk about today is playing on dominant seventh chords. Playing on dominant chords is really one of the core skills that any improviser needs in order to play tunes. Standard tunes, blues tunes, rhythm changes tunes, just about any tune you play on except for maybe a modal tune has got lots of dominant sevenths in it, and they're kind of the meat of jazz. They're the chords that jazz players just love to play on. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to get started sounding really good playing on dominant seventh chords. So a little history here. Way back in the late 70s, when I was just finishing up down at Indiana University, what I learned was if you see a dominant seventh chord, the correct chord scale is Mixolydian. And Mixolydian is just a fancy way of saying a major scale with a flat 7. So if I'm playing on a C7, here's a Mixolydian scale. Or descending. But sometimes it didn't sound quite right. I'd play a line using Mixolydian and it didn't seem to sound like C7. It didn't sound like Charlie Parker records or John Coltrane records that I was used to hearing, where they always sounded so right and so grooving on the dominant chord. When I finally figured it out, it was quite a revelation, because it turns out it's not the scale you use, it's which notes fall on which beats. Or to put it another way, what notes have to fall on the downbeats for a scale to sound like C7? It turns out the secret is simpler than you might imagine. Assuming you're playing eighth notes, what you have to do is play the notes of the chord C, E, G, and B flat on the downbeats. Let me say that again. You need to play C, E, G, and B flat on the downbeats. So if you take your Mixolydian scale, I'm sure you can see that C, A, F, and D are falling on the downbeats. Well, the notes C, A, F, and D sure don't look or sound like C7. They sound like D minor 7, because that's what they are. What happens is the ear interprets the notes that fall on the downbeat as the sound or the notes of the chord. So what we have to do is figure out how to get C, E, G, and B flat to fall on the downbeats. So in order to do that, we make one very small alteration to the Mixolydian scale. Assuming we're starting on the note C, what we do is we put in a half step immediately between the root, C, and the flat 7, B flat. We get this scale. Listen again. So if I slow that down for you, you'll see that inserting that half step between the root and the flat 7 lets us line up the eighth notes so that now, as we descend that scale, you see that the notes B flat, G, and E fall in the downbeats. And it makes the line sound like we're playing a C7 chord. Listen. Again. As opposed to Mixolydian, not right. Bebop dominant. There it is. A 3, 4. So I just gave it away. The secret scale, actually not so secret, is called Bebop dominant. The Bebop dominant scale. It's the scale that inserts a half step whenever necessary so that the root, third, fifth, and the seventh of any dominant chord fall on the downbeats, on 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the notes in between, the passing notes of the scale, fall on the upbeats. So how do we practice this scale? A good way in is to begin by taking a single dominant chord like C7 and playing the scale descending at a slow tempo. I'm again using 54 beats per minute as my half note. And what I'm going to do is start from the root, then start from the third, then start from the fifth, and then start from the seventh. And you'll see that the scale is identical. It's just the starting points that are different. So here's C7, bebop dominant, starting from the root. A 1, 2, 3. Again. Now I'm going to play the same scale. I'm going to start from the third. A 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Cool. Now I'm going to play the same scale again, this time starting from the fifth. 3, 4. And now from the seventh. 3, 4. Something else you may have noticed is that even though the chord tones fall on the downbeats, I'm placing my accents on the upbeats. And this is one of the often overlooked secrets of jazz phrasing. People talk a lot about playing with a triplet feel, and that's really not the most important thing. What really makes a line sound like jazz is accenting the upbeats, the ands, while having the chord tones fall on the downbeats. It's kind of a counterintuitive thing. You're phrasing from the offbeat, which you accent, to the chord tone on the downbeat, which you don't accent. Without the accents, it's just a scale. But if I put those accents in, even keeping the eighth notes perfectly straight, it somehow magically starts to swing. And then you throw in a little bit of a triplet feel with that, and all of a sudden the line really starts to move. How to practice is something that we all have to deal with day in, day out as we strive to attain higher and higher levels in this art. And it's about discipline, a lot of it, and it's about structure. So here's a few ideas about the ways in which you can practice bebop dominant. First, take a given chord like C7, turn your metronome on, and run the scale 4 times in a row from the root. 1 octave. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll just do it twice. C bebop dominant, descending from the root. Now let's run it from the third. A 1, 2, 3, 4. And again. Remember to accent the upbeats. Here it is from the fifth. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. And here it is from the seventh. A 1, 2, 3, 4. And again. Then you could proceed to the next scale around the cycle. When I say going around the cycle, I'm always thinking about going counterclockwise around the circle of fifths. So the next key would be F. So we would play the F bebop dominant scale descending from the root, third, fifth, and seventh. A 1, 2, 3, 4. And again. Then from the third. And again. Let's try F bebop dominant from the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. And then from the seventh. A 1, 2, 3, 4. And again. I found that in order to start to gain mastery, it's better to limit yourself to a smaller amount of material. So rather than doing the entire cycle or circle, it's called both, You might just pick the first three keys, C, F, and B flat, and practice those over and over until you really start to have a feel for those. That way you've done a quarter of the cycle, 3 out of the 12 dominant seventh chords you need to address. A word about dominant seventh chords. What we're working here with are what we would call unaltered dominants. It's a C7 or an F7 or a B flat 7 with no alterations. We can, in these chords, put in the 9th and the 13th because, as you can see, when you play a C7, there's the 13th, there's the 9th. So those extensions are present in the chord. But neither the 9th nor the 5th are sharped or flatted. That would imply a couple of other scale possibilities. Another way to practice bebop dominant scales is to take a single starting point, decide that you're going to play the scale descending from, say, the 3rd, and then do that either all the way around the cycle or just, say, using the first 3 chords of the cycle, C, F, and B flat 7. A 1, 2 from the 3rd, F7, B flat 7. And then you could do that from the other starting points, the root, the 5th, and the 7th as well. Here it is from the 5th. A 1, 2, 3, 4. F7 from the 5th. B flat 7 from the 5th. And E flat 7 from the 5th. The two ways of practicing complement each other. When you practice a single chord from the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, you really get to know that scale. And when you practice from a single starting point, going through several chords, you really get to find that interval, whether it's the 3rd, 5th, or 7th, in relation to several different dominant 7 chords. The other really valuable way to practice dominant 7 chords is to pick a tune that features them prominently in their unaltered form and play that chunk of the tune. The most obvious example would be the changes to George Gershwin's I Got Rhythm. The bridge of that tune starts on 3 dominant. So if we're playing in the key of B flat, the first chord of the bridge of I Got Rhythm will be D7. And again, we could pick, say, a single starting point and say, all right, let's start practicing on the note D, the root, and then the note G, the root of the next chord, etc., through 4 dominant 7 chords. So here's the bridge to I Got Rhythm, just playing from the root descending. 1, 2, 3, 4. So really what you're doing is just the cycle exercise that we talked about before, starting from a single point. However, identifying it as the bridge to I Got Rhythm really gives you more focus and perhaps more desire to practice, because you know the next time you get on a gig, somebody's going to call a rhythm changes tune and you're going to need to play on those changes. So if you practice D7, G7, C7, and F7, 2 bars apiece, you're not really just practicing from some arbitrary place in the cycle, you're actually practicing the bridge to I Got Rhythm, and that'll definitely come in handy on a gig. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to bebop dominant. I think you'll find that it's really one of the most essential pieces of melodic vocabulary that you need to know in order to play jazz. As you listen and re-listen to classic jazz recordings, you'll find yourself ever more aware of the ever-presence of this bebop dominant scale. You should listen to players like Hank Mobley, John Coltrane in the 50s with Miles Davis, even early Wayne Shorter, who most people would regard as a modernist. If you listen to Wayne's playing on late 50s, early 60s Art Blakey records, you're going to hear tons of bebop dominant. It's just all over the place. And as you start to really hear and appreciate that sound, you'll begin to notice it in the playing of all the great masters. Happy practicing! See you next time.